Hello everybody and welcome to my verdict video for Dishonored 2, where I want to share a few thoughts on the game. And as I mentioned in the final episode of my playthrough, I do not have a whole lot to say about the game, because most of the positive things that I could say about the game I already mentioned in my discussion video of the first game, so I'm not going to repeat all of that. However, I also had a few points of criticism about the first game, and I actually think they managed to improve most of them. So that is something that I'm going to talk about. And thanks to these improvements, I also think that the sequel was indeed better than the original. And as you may remember, I already enjoyed the original quite a bit. So I thought this was a really great game, and I had a lot of fun playing it. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the points that I criticized about Dishonored 1 that got improved in the sequel. And as usual, let's start by talking about the gameplay. And I didn't really have a whole lot of complaints about the gameplay in the first game. But there was one point that I mentioned, and that's that I wished for more non-lethal options. I mean, the game does kind of encourage you to go for a non-lethal playstyle, or at least not very lethal playstyle. You don't have to be entirely non-lethal for low chaos, but they do kind of encourage you to play low chaos because they flat out tell you at the beginning it's going to get the better ending. So for a game that encourages you to not kill a lot of people, they don't really give you a whole lot of options to not kill people. I mean, you had 10 sleep darts and very limited possibilities to get new ones during a mission. Sometimes you found a few, but it was pretty rare. And you had the choke, and the choke was very particular. You had to approach your target from behind because your victim had to be completely unaware, and it wouldn't really work if anyone else was around because they would just see you, and the choke just takes a certain amount of time. So that certainly got improved in the sequel, because now we have a bunch of skills that are not specifically non-lethal, but that can be used to improve your non-lethal attacks. For example, Link. Link can be used lethally too, but it greatly increases the effectiveness of sleep darts, for example. So for the first time, I actually had the option to take out groups of people non-lethally at the same time. I never really had that before. I mean, we had the choke dust in the DLC, but that was only temporary. And in the main game, the only option to take out more than one person was to sleep dart them in quick succession before they notice. But in this game, I could use one sleep dart and take out 4 people, and that really was a game changer. Taking out groups of people non-lethally made it actually easier for me to play non-lethally. I did get the Clean Hands achievement at the end of the game, I checked, and I think staying non-lethal was easier in this game because you had more options to play non-lethally, and also because you had fewer people standing at ledges, which is usually what killed me literally in the first game. But also, powers like Mesmerize. I actually kind of regret that I didn't take Mesmerize earlier, because it seems to be quite useful. Think about the first time I used Mesmerize. The witch standing at a ledge. I couldn't use a sleep dart because she probably would fall down and die. I couldn't really approach her because she was looking right at me. So using Mesmerize to distract her and then go over there and choke her out was something that I couldn't really do in the first game. So in the first game, I probably would have used the sleep dart, and she probably would have died by falling to her death. So yeah, I did appreciate the new non-lethal skills, or skills that could support a non-lethal playstyle. And I mean, in addition to that, we also had like the non-lethal drop takedown, and the choke was a lot more useful in this game because you could use it even when, your target noticed you, if you were quick enough. And you could even use it in combat, which I think I did once, like the parry and then the choke on one of Delilah's replicas, because I thought it was the real Delilah, but it wasn't. I think that was the only time I actually managed to do the parry and choke, but it worked. And while it is useful, it certainly has a very limited use too, because as soon as you're fighting more than one person, you can't really do that anymore, because while you're choking out one enemy, the other enemy is going to kill you. However, it still was a nice addition that you could use the choke even after getting discovered. So like I said, I feel playing non-lethally was actually easier in this game than in the previous one. So yeah, that point of criticism that I had of the first game was most certainly fixed. And the rest of the gameplay was fine. I mean, I have a few nitpicky points that I could bring up. For example, the same problem occurred in this game that also occurred in the first game about environmental dialogue being just all over the place, and you couldn't really tell, is the person standing right next to me or is he in a different room? That was a problem in the first game, and it still was prevalent in this game. And I don't know, I thought the dark vision was a little bit cumbersome in this game. I'm not sure if it's only Emily's dark vision that is like that, and if Corvo has his old dark vision that works the same as it did before. But Emily's dark vision certainly was not quite as convenient as Corvo's dark vision in the first game. I mean, it still worked, and I still used it a lot. It just seemed needlessly inconvenient. What else could I criticize? I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the final battle against Delilah. It felt a little bit out of place, because I think the only way to actually properly win that battle was by trial and error. You know, I had to try and see what was going on, and then I had to try and see where were all the replicas. And by trial and error, I mean I had to die and then reload. And if a game requires you to die and reload, it always feels very gamey to me. You know, you realize you're playing a game because you're replaying the same part over and over and over again until you get it right. And I'm not a big fan of that kind of gameplay. I mean, sure, I did die before in the game, and then I used the knowledge from that mistake to make it better the next time. But I never died more than once to the same situation. So dying over and over again until I find the right strategy to beat Delilah, it didn't really fit with the rest of the game, I feel. But that's just my personal opinion. And I don't know, I feel that maybe some of the missions were a little bit too long, especially since they took a bit too long to get to the point, so to speak. Think about the mission where you were going after Kirin Jindosh, for example. I think like 2/3 of the mission were just going to the Clockwork Mansion. And once I was in the Clockwork Mansion, which I think was the most interesting part of the mission had been going on for so long that I was just like, okay, I kind of want to go back now and finish this. So I didn't really spend that much time exploring the place anymore. So yeah, maybe a little bit too long, especially since sometimes there wasn't really a good reason for them to be so long. There's one thing that I wanted to mention. It's not really a point of criticism, it's just something weird. In the mission with the Duke, the Grand Palace mission, you get dropped off like in that palace district, and then you have to find your way through the palace district and through the Wall of Light to the island with the Grand Palace. And then once you were done, Megan just picked you up at the Duke's private dock, or very close to it. So why didn't she drop you off there in the first place? That is my question. I have no idea. There was no real in-game explanation. I feel something was supposed to happen before she picked you up, because she actually mentioned, I saw the signal, when I never actually sent any kind of signal. So I think maybe you were supposed to disable a watchtower and send a signal so she could come in and pick you up, and they just kind of forgot to put that in. You know, kind of like in the Edelmeyer mission, you also had to disable a watchtower and then Megan could pick you up. But not in this mission. In this mission, she was suddenly able to drive all the way up to the Duke's dock and pick you up. And that would have saved Emily a lot of trouble if she had just dropped her off there in the first place. I don't know, maybe the implication was that because the Duke is now on our side, she could actually come in. But I mean, even after we replaced the Duke, I still had to hide from guards and clockwork soldiers. So the territory was still hostile and not neutral. So I think there was something was supposed to happen before Megan picked you up. But that's just an odd thing that I noticed after I edited the episode. It's not really a main criticism that I have about the game. But yeah, overall I think gameplay is great. I do appreciate the fact that they actually added new powers. I mean, they could have gone the lazy route and just gave Emily the same skills than they gave Corvo in the first game. But they decided to give her an almost completely new skill set. Even those skills that were similar to Corvo's powers were a little bit different. I actually thought they were not quite as useful, like the dark vision, and even the far reach was a little bit weird because the blink is going like in a straight line and the far reach was more going in a curve, and you had to calculate the curve as well because you couldn't curve through stuff and so on. So it was a little bit more finicky. But I do applaud them for actually trying to give her different skills instead of just, going with the same methods and skills that you had in the first game. So yeah, overall, I think gameplay was great and improved to the gameplay of the first game. So instead, let's talk about the story and the narrative elements now. And I believe I had two major points of criticism about them in the first game. The first one was the plot. And by plot, I mean like the main story arc. Because I thought it was a little bit too generic and a little bit too predictable. And I do believe that they actually did improve it in this game. I mean, on the one hand, it is kind of a repeat of the premise of the first game. So someone is killing people and you're getting the blame for it. And now you have to take down the people responsible for it and clear your name. So the basic premise is the same. But I think in this game they added enough twists and fresh elements to make it feel different and to make it feel not quite as generic. And I do believe that playing as Emily actually helped that. I don't know, I think playing the story as Corvo probably would have felt more like a repeat of the previous story, but playing it as Emily gave it a fresh angle because she was an empress trying to get her throne back, so that was a new angle. And I think we also had a more interesting opponent with Delilah. I mean, sure, in the first game we had the loyalists, I suppose, because they turned out to be opponents in the end, and they were reasonably interesting, but they didn't really have any motivation besides being power-hungry and greedy. And your main opponent in the first game, which I suppose was the Lord Regent, I mean, he barely had any personality at all, besides being evil and power-hungry and greedy. So, yeah, the opponents in that game, specifically those that were not the loyalists, were not very interesting, and the motivations of all your opponents were pretty generic too. Delilah is a more interesting opponent, certainly. She has a more complex motivation, sometimes slightly bizarre, with the whole turning the reality into her painting, but certainly more interesting than just, being power-hungry, which I suppose she was too, but there was more to it, and we had more of a backstory for her, and there was some revenge involved as well. So yeah, certainly a more interesting opponent than we had in the previous game. So overall, I think the story, while not like super original, was more interesting and not as generic as it was in the first game. Also, I like the fact that they managed to think about new methods to take out your targets, some of which actually improved their situation instead of making it worse. I mean, one of the things in the first game was the fact that you had non-lethal methods to take down your main targets, but for the most part, the non-lethal methods were actually worse than the lethal ones, if you think about it. Prime example, probably the High Overseer. So you could just kill him, or you could brand him as a heretic, and then you would actually see him again during towards the end of the game, being infected by the Red Plague and close to death. So essentially he's going to die anyway, just in a much slower and crueler way than before. Or, the Pendleton brothers who got sent to mines and had their tongues cut out. Or Lady Boyle, who we delivered to her stalker for the rest of her life. Some people would argue that they would prefer to die than endure that kind of fate. So in the first game, you certainly had some non-lethal methods that made you feel rather bad afterwards. In this game, well, Kieran Jindosh's treatment was probably the cruelest, but everyone else, Brianna just was made a human again. The Duke got locked up, but when it came to Hypatia and Aramis Stilton, we actually made the situation better. So that was an interesting twist on the whole eliminate your target non-lethally mechanic, because we could actually improve someone's situation by eliminating them as a threat. So again, that was an interesting new twist on essentially the kind of gameplay we had in the first game, but with a different angle. So again, I like that a lot. And I think the second point of criticism that I had about the first game was the fact that your protagonist, Corvo, was, well, quite literally a faceless protagonist. I thought that he had the potential to be an interesting character just from the bits and pieces of information that you found all over the game. But he never really lived up to that potential because he was faceless, he was unvoiced, and you didn't really have a whole lot of a possibility to roleplay him because there weren't like decisions or dialogue choices in a huge amount. So he felt a little bit bland, which was sad because, as I mentioned before, I thought he seemed like he could be an interesting character. And yeah, this was certainly improved in this game too. First of all, your character was voiced. That already helps a lot to give her personality. And in addition to that, you had these short monologues in between missions where Emily talked about her experiences and shared her thoughts, and that certainly helped to build her character. And as I mentioned during the game, I actually thought she had a decent amount of character development during the game, because at the beginning, she was the Empress, but she didn't particularly seem to, realize the power she has and how she could use that power to actually improve people's lives. I feel the implication was that life was generally good under Empress Emily, and that it was better than it was before under the Lord Regent. But there was obviously still a lot of wrong, and Emily seemed to be, she preferred to, leave the palace and roam around the city hidden, and didn't take her responsibilities completely serious. And I don't really blame her for doing that, because she was very young when she came to the throne. She had no experience. Same for Corvo. He had no real experience in being a ruler or the advisor to a ruler. He was more like a bodyguard before. So I think in the end they were both kind of inexperienced, and I feel that Emily wasn't really aware of the whole responsibility that she had. And I believe that during the course of the game she realized that she had to use her power more to help people and make the situation better for people, and that she couldn't just, look away from, stuff going on in Sarkonis, for example, because, whatever, the Duke there will take care of it, and I don't really want to get bothered with it. So yeah, I think she had some decent character development throughout the game. As a matter of fact, I feel that the story was primarily written for Emily as a character. I don't know. I haven't played Corvo's story, so I don't know how his story would play out, and if his character gets any kind of actual development during the story. But just looking at the story from Emily's side, I feel the story was written for Emily, and Corvo was just added because, he was a protagonist of the first game, and some people may want to play as him again. But I'm very glad I picked Emily, because it certainly felt like the story was written for Emily, you know, taking back her throne, learning something about responsibility, and even like the whole scene with her mother when she had to let go of the spirit of her mother seemed more impactful to me if it's between a mother and her daughter. I mean, sure, Corvo obviously had a relationship to Jessamine as well, but again, it's different when it's like the daughter and her mother, and, you know, Delilah being related to Emily certainly added to that as well. So yeah, it certainly feels to me as if the story had been written with Emily in mind. And I think it was a good decision because, like I said, it gave the story a new and fresh angle and an interesting twist. So, with my two major points of criticism about story and protagonist from the previous game fixed in this one, is there actually anything that I would criticize about the narrative elements of this game? Not really. I can't really think of any meaningful point of criticism that I would have about the story in this game. We had a number of interesting callbacks to the previous game. We had Sokolov, we had Megan/Billy. And again, Megan being Billy may have been a little bit too obvious, but I'm not going to call out the game for that. Yeah, so I don't know. I can't think of anything. I have nothing to say that I would change about the game to improve it. So there's that. So maybe to wrap this up, two questions that I got regarding the game or series in general. First of all, will I play the game as Corvo? I would like to play the game as Corvo, but probably not as a Let's Play, because apparently the missions themselves are the same. So what changes is, I'm going to assume, the interactions between Corvo and the different people, and obviously the dialogue. But I'm not sure if that's really enough new content to warrant an entire playthrough. But I would be interested to revisit Corvo as a character because, as I mentioned, I thought he could be an interesting character from what I've seen in the first game, but he never really lived up to that potential due to mostly technical limitations like not being voiced, for example. But yeah, there's not going to be like a second playthrough of the game as Corvo. And the other question is, will I play Death of the Outsider, which is kind of a DLC/sequel. It's not really like a full game because it's a lot shorter, but it's also standalone, so it's not really a DLC. So it's kind of a spin-off maybe. And yes, I would be interested to play it. I'm not going to play it right away, but since it is significantly shorter than the other Dishonored games, I may put it into one of the gaps in between different installments of Assassin's Creed, because as you know, I usually pick like a shorter game to play in between various Assassin's Creed games, and Death of the Outsider might be a perfect game for one of these intermissions. So yeah, it might happen, but I can't tell you when at the moment. It's definitely going to be a few months at least. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I gotta say at the moment. Like I said, it's not much. Most of what I praised about the first game, like the interesting setting, the lore, the visual design of the game, still holds true for this game, so no point in going through all of that again. And yeah, I really enjoyed playing this game, so I hope you enjoyed watching me play it. And I hope you come back for whenever I will play Death of the Outsider, or you will watch any of my other Let's Plays. However, there is going to be a break after this video. You may have heard it in my update video, and if you haven't, you should go check it out, because I'm going on a vacation, and once I'm back, I will start the next game, which is going to be Fallout New Vegas, and I think the first episode I scheduled for September the 29th, so basically, once I'm back from vacation, I will start recording that. But yeah, that's pretty much all. Thank you for watching, and see you again next time.